The truth is that I will never be rejected by God, and his embrace is enough for me, even if I am rejected by people. So the truth is not the opposite of the lie that I will never be rejected. The truth is that God is enough.
Bienvenidos todos. Pues Padre Santo, gracias Señor por este día, por esta oportunidad que nos das de estar reunidos, gracias a la tecnología y Padre, también a la disposición de Scott de compartir su tiempo y platicarnos de su vida, su testimonio, lo que tú has hecho a través de él, Señor, para extender tu reino y te alabamos por eso, Señor. Te pedimos que el Espíritu Santo esté presente con cada uno de nosotros, Señor, que hable a través de Scott, Señor, y que a nosotros nos permita tener oídos espirituales, Señor, para que lo que tú quieras mostrarnos y enseñarnos, Señor, lo grabemos en nuestro corazón y lo pongamos en práctica, Señor, de manera que este tiempo tenga mucho valor, Señor, sea de mucha utilidad y que podamos seguir honrándote y glorificándote, Señor, y que todo lo que hagamos lo hagamos para ti. Gracias, Padre, porque nos has dado la oportunidad de impactar el mundo en el ámbito de los negocios, del trabajo. Es donde nos has puesto, Señor, a cosechar, Señor. Y sabemos que la cosecha ya está madura. Y, Padre, nosotros somos obreros de tu mies. Queremos ser fieles a ti, Señor, y pues, damos este tiempo en tus manos y te damos gracias en el nombre de Jesús.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mimi. It's a great pleasure of mine to introduce a guy that I actually met in Africa and got to talking with him and just had a heart for people and business and was there just to be available to mentor our friends in Africa. And anyway, Scott told me that he had a little ranch. And of course, being from Mexico, my idea of a ranch was, a place that had, two wooden doors with chains that you had to unlock and open. But when I went to visit him, it was much more than that. And he's going to share his story of how God led him in his calling. And I'm really excited for the privilege to introduce Scott Morrison. So thank you, Scott, for being with us.
My pleasure. I do have this talk translated, and I'm hoping that you could make that available to folks afterwards so that if there were some of the points that they would like to refer to, it would be easier for them to do so. But I'll leave that to you, and we will begin. I had a couple pictures of that I wanted to share. This is not actually the house I grew up in. It's my grandmother's house, but that is the kind of situation that I grew up in on a farmhouse out surrounded by fields on the outside of Phoenix, Arizona, but well outside of the Phoenix area. And we live in the desert, so everything that we grew had to be irrigated. And so that's what it looks like when you use a cement ditch and aluminum siphon tubes to get the water into the field. And you can grow beautiful cotton if you do that. I grew up in that environment. My dad took this picture, I'm sure. And so my mom and dad had three sons. I'm on the right, and we all grew up on the farm. So that's a little introduction before the rest of my talk. In 1972, as a freshman in college, I accepted Christ at a Navigator conference. There was absolutely a new life in me, and many things changed, but not my career plans. So I continued in physics and planned to be a scientist. But by my third year in college, God showed me that A, I am more of a maker than a theoretical person, and B, I did not enjoy pure theory. As I processed that, one of the side benefits was that I realized I was very emotionally connected to my plans to be a physicist, and that if I took a fresh look at it, it was not really what I wanted to do. So, as God so often does, He was working on my character and maybe working on an idol in the idea of being a famous physicist. But as He did that, I took a fresh look at my career plans and realized I would rather go home and farm. I was surprised. My parents were surprised, and pretty much everyone I knew was surprised. So I changed majors to agricultural engineering, and I got that degree, but with the plan to go back and farm. And that is what I did for about 10 years. I started farming with my older brother, but shortly I was the only family member in my generation actively farming. I started just farming, but shortly I was leading a small navigator ministry at the nearby Air Force Base. And shortly I got married to my wife, Stormy. Those were 10 wonderful years during which Stormy and I learned how to be married and learned from and helped other young marrieds at the Air Force Base. And many of us had our first kids. Some of those folks turned out to be lifelong friends that we still are friends with today. Meanwhile, I learned how to run a small business and be an employer and plan an annual budget and keep all the tractors going. Looking back, I realize how much I would have benefited from a mentor. My dad had been in a terrible car accident when I was 13, and while he was still with us, he was not able to be a mentor to me when I started farming. I knew all the pieces, but I didn't understand the priorities, so I rather limped along. The farm started at about 200 acres and ended up at about 1,000 acres. That is a lot of growth, but I spread pretty thin. But probably more important was that I misunderstood what it meant to love my employees. I wanted to be nice to them and for them to like me, and it pretty much stopped there. I had not yet processed how much it would benefit them for the farm to be very successful in terms of their opportunities. And I did not realize the role I could have in helping them grow in life. So I didn't train them and communicate expectations and then hold them to high standards of performance. That would have been harder, but it would have also benefited all of us more. I want to emphasize you don't hold someone to a standard you haven't communicated to them, and you don't require a standard that they don't know how to meet. So the order and combination of that list is important. You have to train them in what you expect and then clearly communicate what you expect and then hold them accountable. The ministry at the base started with about 4 couples and ended with about 20 couples. Of course, the Air Force made sure no one stayed there longer than 3 years, and many were moved after 1 year. We did the typical navigator activities, including in-depth Bible study and fellowship gatherings in our living room. Our ministry started with officers learning to fly and pretty much stayed that way. It was a great group of folks. As our family grew to 4 kids and the farm grew and the ministry grew, I began to struggle with trying to meet my responsibilities in all 3 of these areas. And I asked God how to deal with this. And I realized that part of my problem was that the three areas didn't really touch one another. So anything I did for one area did not help the other. So I began to pray to God for a plan that would make my life seamless, that the parts would all touch. There were probably 3 years that I prayed about this, and while I considered many things, in the end, Stormy and I decided that the right thing was to go full time with the Navigators. That meant shutting down the farm, and that meant leaving our current ministry to others and moving to Colorado Springs for staff training. And that is what we did. I absolutely believe that God wanted this particular change and move, and it was for reasons very different than I expected. I thought I was going to be NAV staff for the rest of my life, and I thought I knew what that looked like. Well, the reason that didn't happen is a different and long story for another time. But let me just say that after 2 years, we knew we were not going to be on staff, and we're trying to figure out what next. And I will insert here, I want to make it very clear that the reasons why it didn't work for me to stay on staff were with me and not with the Navigators. And I love the Navigators dearly, and I wasn't a good fit for being full-time. So we were considering what to do next. I considered being in computer sales. I considered being a commercial pilot. I considered some form of going back to farm, but that would have been awkward with the family. But in the middle of that, God put an idea in my head that was just as strong as if he had spoken. He said that I knew I was a part owner of a bunch of land my parents farmed, and that I was refusing to be a steward of that ownership, and that I needed to act like an adult and insert myself into the management of the property. So I won't talk about tax laws or the details, but our parents had made us actual owners of the property I'm talking about, and not just that we were going to inherit it someday. If it had not been that way, I don't think I should have done what I did. And neither my dad nor my uncle had any interest in any of their children acting like adults regarding their land, even though all of us were in our 30s. So this was very frightening to me. But God kept the thought clear and prepared the way so that I could do it. And part of the call was that it was time to think about developing the property rather than just continuing to farm. What had been a large farm on the outskirts of a small town was already surrounded by development of subdivisions, with more on the way. So that is what we did. And I have been at that since 1991. Picture might help now. Hmm. Are you seeing a picture of my family? You're not.
Yeah. No, well, it's the former one,
Yeah.
Scott.
So that was my family as we came back and started working on this project just shortly after we got back. My wife is wonderful, and I have 4 great kids who don't look like that at all anymore. 1971 was a long time ago. I'll leave that up there while I talk for a bit. One of the things that made this work is that I looked for and God provided a mentor. That man was a believer and a land developer and liked to mentor younger people. So it was a great fit. He mentored me himself intensively for 4 years and also introduced me to a land planner, a landscape architect, who also mentored me even longer than the first man. This was absolutely critical to my success, as there are so much to know about dealing with my customers who are the home builders in the area and the city who had rules about everything and with whom we needed to work to get plan approval. And I had to lead my extended family where they were not particularly interested in going, especially at first. My mentors could not teach me much about that, but they could give me emotional support in what was a very difficult effort. Working through the family issues and pushing for things my uncle didn't want was very hard. And I am very grateful that I had that clear sense of calling from God, because I would have given up if it hadn't been for that. And one of the interesting things about this career path is that it has turned out to be seamless. I have been working with my extended family, and most of my kids have worked with me at least a short time. And my ministry has been primarily with my extended family and the business contacts I have developed. So God answered my earlier prayer for a seamless life. And this has been for far longer than any of the other things that I've done. And the particular master plan that we have been developing is almost done. My mentors and I came up with a plan to make a subdivision that reminded people of the agricultural heritage of our area. And so these are a couple of the pictures of the project that I have been working on all these years. And most shopping centers in Arizona don't have trees in front, but ours have trees. And most don't have grass and trees along the street, but we do. And so that's the nature of what I have been doing. Developing a community is a rare business opportunity, and planning the layout is a great way to reveal your values and discuss why they are what they are. One could design a community to minimize open space with the idea that doing so would maximize profit. We discussed at the very beginning that we wanted to build a great place for people to live. So we had more open space than the town required and put it in centrally located or connected in paths throughout the community. We talked about building spaces where neighbors could meet one another and build relational community. This is not a normal value in the development community. With some, I could have the conversation that this was born of wanting to love the people who moved in, which came from God's command to love one another. With others, it was just a few sentences here and there. The way we priced the property, that open space did not cost the builders anything, but reduced what our family received. But there is an interesting thing about following God. Over time, as people saw what our project was like, home buyers really wanted to live here, and so the selling price of homes in our development was actually higher than the same size house elsewhere. So when we priced our land, we actually ended up getting more than the other neighbors got. I can't turn that into an accurate number of how much that amounted to, but it was encouraging to see God use us to create a great community and reward us financially at the same time. I don't describe that as a promise from God, but it is what he did in our place. Along the way, I learned some valuable business lessons that wouldn't come from the classroom. Number one, make sure you know what you have in detail. You always think that you know, but what are the real details of ownership, rights, and limitations on those? An example in our case would be knowing that our partnership agreement did not allow a partner to withdraw without unanimous approval. So when my older brother demanded to be removed from the partnership, I didn't need to agree. The irony is that is an attorney and wrote the partnership agreement that said he couldn't withdraw just by demanding it, but he was still my older brother. Maybe someone can relate. Number two, when someone says something is against the rules, ask to see the rule. It is amazing how often the rule is different from the shorthand that people use for it. An example in our case is when we wanted to use grass along the roads to remind people of the agriculture that had always been around our town, we were told it is against the law. That's a very strong statement. My mentor got me to press to see this law. And what it actually says is that grass cannot be planted there and irrigated with well water. But we were developing just at the time when our town was starting to distribute reclaimed water. And that meant it was perfectly legal to have grass along the streets irrigated with that reclaimed water. And as the photos that I was showing indicate, we have miles and miles of streets with grass along them, and it's all perfectly legal. And yet, if we just listen to that first statement, it's against the law, we wouldn't have done it. Number three, the interaction before and after a meeting is often as valuable as the meeting itself. So provide time for this. I can't think of a specific example about this, but relationships are incredibly important in business. And the stories about family and kids and vacations that get told before and after a meeting build bonds which affect what someone will do for you when you need them to. Number four, don't be afraid or too stubborn to do someone's job for them. Sometimes it just comes down to that. An example would be the number of times I have had to explain a contract to a title officer whose very job is to read and understand the contract for the sale of land. It is not fair, but it is the way to keep moving forward. I also learned some spiritual rules. Number one, God is good even when things go bad for a while. Our read of bad is very limited. I'm going to insert a story here that I didn't put in my notes, but in 1998, we were trying to process our big zoning case, and we had an enemy in the community who was trying to prevent it and told lies about us, and it was very difficult and went on for months. And I was praying to God and said, God, you have to give us approval tonight because my family just cannot take any more of this. And I went to the meeting and we did not get approval. And it was extended 2 weeks yet again. And then we got approval. And I think God wanted to stretch my faith and help me see what he could do when I thought it was at the end of my rope. And he was good the whole time. Number two, we are never in control of outcomes, even when we think we are. God is the one who is in control. Often when I say this to people, it drives them crazy. But surely it's up to me to make things happen. No, it is up to you to do your best and let God make things happen. And if you think you are in control, look back to 2008 and the I think global financial meltdown and see if everybody's plans that they made in late 2007 happened just as they intended because they were in control. We are not in control. We offer our best efforts as an expression of our love for God and for others, not because we can guarantee the outcome. Number 3, loving your neighbor is being committed to what is good to them, not being nice. Sometimes encouraging good is the last thing they want, but it's still the loving thing to do. Number 4, when you live in a community for a long time, you can be a witness for Christ with a slow, steady pace. I don't try to share the gospel with my business associates, but I speak of my faith a sentence or two at a time in most meetings and most settings. Have been able to do that with the same people for years and years. God has reinforced that he is pleased with this by sending me 3 men in the last year who have spoken of how my Christian walk has encouraged them. And several of them I had not heard from for years, and 2 sought me out, and 1, we were suddenly doing a little business together, and he made a point. And he went on at some length about how encouraging that was. So when we're in a college campus, we might need to share the gospel quickly. When we're in business, we can take our time and be consistent. And got off on my own. In addition, truths that I have known since 1972 have grown in depth and become more practical anchors for how I deal with business. In particular, the nature of God. We have a grand God. And everything that comes to our mind when we think of how big God is too small. It just is. Our God spoke at least 10 to the 24th stars into existence. That's a billion trillion. We have a really big God. That is incredibly powerful. Yet he loves us, and he wants what is good for us, and he is patient in pursuing what is good for us. It absolutely stretches the imagination that a God so powerful would then be so tender towards the likes of me, but that is the truth. And he has so much bandwidth that he can be attentive to me all the time, and also to you. If I put together those characteristics of God, I find a security that escapes me when I think of God, as I am tempted to, as a distant and somewhat disappointed father. In 2007, I began to learn some things about my inner beliefs regarding me and my older brother. I had made him a substitute father in my mind as a young boy, and that had messed up our relationship ever since. Realizing that, and then thinking about God as my all-sufficient father, and then letting go of the lie, really made a difference in our relationships, both as family and as business partners. In the years that followed, I continued to learn more deeply that God loves me just as I am, while at the same time drawing me along to grow. I found a peace inside when I had never really known what that word peace meant. Slowly finding new lies and false ideas that I was believing and comparing them to Scripture and turning from the lie to the truth has been helping me to live better ever since. The process I now think about has 4 steps. I need to notice when something is wrong. So often that is an overaction on my part to some conversation. Then, probably with the help of another person, I need to see what false idea I am believing that produces that overreaction. An example would be that I'm believing that if someone sees my flaws, I will be rejected. Then I need to discover the truth about that false belief. I may well know the truth of Scripture in my mind already, but in this setting, I am not believing it and not trusting it. Or I may need to be taught the truth by a dear friend who would be a part of my conversation and help me. In this example, the truth is that I will never be rejected by God, and His embrace is enough for me, even if I am rejected by people. So the truth is not the opposite of the lie that I will never be rejected. The truth is that God is enough. And then I am ready to clearly, intentionally reject the lie and turn to the truth. These 4 steps have been very practical in helping me change over the last few years. And yes, in my 70s, I still need to change. These ideas have been something I have wanted to offer younger people that they might benefit from this process at a younger age than I started. I have tried to mentor some people locally who have a lot of options in our area. And I thought about the fact that my success in business and my partial retirement as our project approaches completion means that I can travel to offer mentorship for those who do not have a lot of options and that at least share our worldview. Because the dear friend was a missionary in Kenya, I got to know some young businessmen and women in Kenya and mentored them. But Kenya is very far away, and it has been hard to maintain a rhythm of contact. And then in about 2017, Bruce Hook introduced me to the community of young married folks in the NAV community in Guatemala City. And since then, I have been making trips down as often as I can to mentor them. My mentorship is almost worthless as to the specific jobs they have, but I know something of the corporate world. I know a lot about family-owned businesses, and I can offer some of the ideas I have mentioned to encourage their faith in God in the midst of work and family. I have enjoyed those relationships very much.
Well, Scott, so thank you for your testimony. And I thought it'd be appropriate that since Seth and William have been part of that, maybe they could share a few thoughts with us.
That wasn't very fair, was it, Seth?
Oh, hello, Scott. How are you? How are you doing? Um, Maybe change Spanish if you prefer. Scott
Sí, en
or
español,
Rusi. Ok, perfecto. No, ¿qué puedo decir? Scott es un gran amigo de los Chapines. Entró en una etapa donde nosotros teníamos mucha necesidad. Em, Algunos saben, ¿no? O sea, Jorge Dávila estuvo como, como obrero de tiempo completo y nosotros no teníamos a quién ver eh, como trabajadores, como esposos, como padres, o algunos teníamos algunos emprendimientos. Bueno, William hablará más de su emprendimiento, ¿verdad? En cuanto a esto, unas vidas un poco complicadas. El hecho de poder tener a Scott junto con Bruce fue muy refrescante para nosotros. Poder tener a un abuelo donde haya vivido muchas experiencias y poderla trasladar a nosotros en medio de nuestro cotidiano vivir. Am, fue muy enriquecedor. Tal vez no lo vieron ellos así, pero para nosotros fue como un salvavidas, ¿no? Aprender a ver cómo en medio de nuestras vidas caóticas, teniendo niños pequeños, encontrar un poco de gracia y decir, oye, ver la gracia de Dios en esto. Definitivamente esto no coarta, o sea, no recorta el hecho de poder seguir esforzándose en medio de conseguir financiamientos o ventas o esforzarse por algunas circunstancias, no quita eso, pero sí un norte de poder saber por qué hacemos lo que hacemos, a dónde vamos, ¿verdad? ¿Cuáles son nuestros, uh, pues, valores como navegantes en medio de nuestra vida como caótica? Entonces, para Scott, un gran amigo y también para Bruce también, porque fue así, Scott y Bruce vinieron un día y pudieron compartir con nosotros y nosotros necesitábamos. Por parte de mí, es lo que puedo decir. Palabras de agradecimiento para ti, Scott y Brucey, ¿verdad? Por este servicio que han hecho para con nosotros y nos han ayudado a ser un poquito mejores delante de Dios. No por ustedes, sino por nosotros, porque ustedes han hecho mucho en nosotros.
Pues
That's, that's,
gracias, Jeff.
that's it for
Y,
me.
y William, hemos hablado y es tu micrófono.
Muchas gracias. Sí, también puedo decir, digamos, como un testimonio de cuánto puede ayudar un mentor, ¿verdad? O como lo conocemos mejor entre navegantes, un uno a uno. Una persona que esté dispuesta a dar de tu tiempo, de su tiempo, de sus recursos, para viajar, para ir, para asistir, para estar y estar cerca o cerca de uno, ¿verdad? Y de estar cerca de las necesidades. Y es cierto lo que menciona Seth, en Guatemala estábamos pasando ahí en esos años por ah, tal vez de un cansancio muy severo y por tratar de hacer algunas cosas en la carne sin tener un mentor o sin tener personas que, que con las que nosotros claramente pudiéramos, ¿verdad? Buscar ayuda, ¿verdad? Que tuviéramos como alguna estructura de buscar ayuda y apoyo. Y ciertamente que cuando se dio estas relaciones que Bruce propició, ¿verdad? Con Scott y con otras personas también, nos ayudaron muchísimo, ¿verdad? Digamos, en mi caso particular, tener de cerca a alguien como Scott, que como mentor, ¿verdad? Alguien que te puedas acercar y poder hablar como amigo y como alguien, un amigo con más experiencia, eh, que ya ha pasado por esos terrenos, ¿verdad? Que ya ha pasado caminando por ciertas áreas de la vida, y no solo en empresas, sino que en mi caso particular, me ha ayudado con mi vida espiritual, me ha dado consejos de vida, consejos de negocios, consejos de matrimonio, consejos para mis hijos. Entonces esa relación ha valido oro. Es como tener a un consejero de Forbes 500 en el WhatsApp, ¿verdad? Que puedes hablar con alguien de ellos. Así los considero a Bruce y a Scott, ¿verdad? De poder hablar rápidamente con alguien que tiene mucha experiencia caminando con el Señor y que te pueden dar un consejo, ¿verdad? Y en el caso específico de Scott, su experiencia en negocios es ciertamente, tal vez no hay alguien en Guatemala que posea tanta tierra para desarrollar como el caso de Scott, ¿verdad? Pero eh, su experiencia en negocios ha sido muy, eh, para mí, ¿verdad? Ha sido muy buena, ¿verdad? Yo soy dueño de una empresa, somos 30 personas y he venido ahí con unas dudas de cómo puedo compartir el evangelio con todas estas personas, ¿verdad? Eh, de una manera eficaz y de una manera donde sea sana mi relación con los que son mis empleados también. Y Scott, la verdad es que me ha ayudado mucho en entender cómo debería ser mi papel para con las personas que trabajan conmigo ahora. Y ha sido, ¿verdad? Un refrigerio del Señor, una oración contestada, tener amigos como Bruce, como Scott y como otras personas también que nos han ayudado seguir caminando en el camino, ¿verdad? De la gracia y seguir creciendo y saber que Dios nos escucha. Yo no sé si Scott y Bruce vieron la cara de necesidad que teníamos en esos años o qué, pero Dios definitivamente contestó la oración de la necesidad tan grande que teníamos, ¿verdad? Con estos amigos. Y sin duda, pues, las lecciones han estado no solo en los negocios, sino, digamos, y los consejos, ¿verdad? Han estado en nuestra vida completa, ¿verdad? Negocios, familia, hijos, ministerio, cómo llevar el ministerio en medio de todo esto, ¿verdad? Así que, pues eso puedo decir.
Pues gracias, William. Y él mencionó, William, que había otra persona también, Tim Sparks, que realmente hizo la primera viaje con Scott y yo. Ha sido muy útil en abrir negocio para el negocio de William. Entonces, pues lo que es importante son las relaciones, ¿verdad? Pero quería abrir si había una pregunta o comentario, está abierto a los que quieren preguntar o tener una duda de algo que Scott dijo.
Sí, a mí me llamó Scott mucho la atención el ejemplo que pones que en los negocios no, el ministerio y los negocios no es como en el campus o en la universidad de que tiene que ser rápido y todo, sino debe ser más constante, más de largo plazo, más de que vean tu vida los empleados y estar dando testimonio para que dure. Y no es digamos, no es una carrera de 100 metros, es un maratón, ¿no? Lo que podríamos hacer de, de símile, como lo comentaste, y eso se me hizo muy interesante, porque nos están viendo y queremos que el negocio dure mucho tiempo con ellos, con nuestros empleados. Poco lo que dice William, cómo relacionarnos con ellos para no tener conflictos en el trabajo todos los días, sino que vaya siendo una relación de largo plazo y ir convirtiéndolos así.
I agree very much. When I was farming, I tried to do some things um, that were more like sharing the gospel or ministry opportunity with my employees. And of course, everybody just wanted to say what they thought I wanted to hear. And there's almost no value in that. But you flip it around and don't create an event, but live the gospel in front of people every day consistently to include being committed to what is best for them. And that has an impact. Little by little, month by month, year by year, that has an impact. And it's very difficult for them to ignore it because it has staying power. Now, if our testimony is not like that, then that would be a different problem. But if we can trust God and maintain that attitude, it has a big impact on our employees.
¿Otra pregunta o comentario?
Quería darle las gracias
Yo
a...
les- Berta, adelante.
¿Sí se oye? Hola. ¿Sí? Me gustaría dar las gracias a Scott por su testimonio y pues siento que no sé si pueda darnos algunos tips que mi esposo y yo tenemos una constructora y queremos iniciar en lo de eh, subdividir predios y hacer fraccionamiento, pero como que estamos un poco perdidos de cómo empezar y los pasos que hay que seguir. Eh, Creo que Scott sería un buen mentor para apoyarnos. Si se puede, sería fabuloso. Gracias.
Gracias, Berta. Scott, Mexico is closer than Guatemala.
One of the things I know about real estate is that real estate is very, very local. And the local relationships and the local rules and the local values cannot be understood quickly by an outsider. So I have principles that I could communicate, but not practical steps, because what applied in my very local setting doesn't apply 30 miles away in downtown Phoenix, and it very much would not apply in Mexico. But the principles can be transferred. I had friends in Kenya who said, help us build a subdivision in Kenya. And I said, I know so much about real estate that I will not help you build a subdivision in Kenya. Because I know enough to know I should not do that. But we can talk about principles.
And I can, yo puedo conseguir o ponerle en contacto con información de Scott con muchísimo gusto.
Algo interesante de lo compartido esta tarde es la importancia, lo que puedo rescatar, la importancia de un mentor, cómo Scott fue ayudado precisamente por gente con la cual se acercó y le permitió esos cambios de dirección con la guía de Dios, sin duda, pero su proyección pues en lo inmobiliario y cómo Scott a la vez fue o está siendo un buen mentor para los amigos de Guatemala, y cómo estos con lo que están aprendiendo y la experiencia ganada podrán ser mentores también para nuevos jóvenes, ¿no? Entonces, la importancia de que necesitamos un mentor, no estar solos o buscar con quién abrir nuestras necesidades, y como ya lo decían Seth y Williams, no solamente en lo del negocio, lo empresarial, sino la aportación que se les hizo en la vida personal, familiar y espiritual. Entonces, creo que todos necesitamos un mentor, o todos podemos contribuir de alguna manera siendo mentor de alguien más, ¿no?
Y tal vez, Guille, puedes hacer el anuncio allí, porque parte de lo que genera es que queremos estar disponibles a nuestros amigos en la forma que necesita, pero sin imponer y sin ocupar tiempo que a veces no tiene. Pero esa es parte de lo que es la visión, porque tenemos Javier y Meme, Ricardo, Mauricio, tu servidor, Jorge, y Javier está ahí. Entonces, es nuestro deseo que no sientas solo. Guy, no sé si quieres decir algo.
Sí, sí, gracias, Bruce. Todos estamos experimentando lo significativo que es para nuestras vidas tener un mentor que no solamente nos ayude en nuestro negocio, sino también en todas las áreas de nuestra vida. Necesitamos sentirnos acompañados, que alguien nos ayude a ver lo que no vemos, y por eso es muy importante que si queremos tener una empresa misional, dejemos que Dios ocupe su lugar y también reconocer que separados de Dios no podemos hacer nada y que necesitamos a gente que nos ayude. En Genera queremos brindarte apoyo y queremos acompañarte en este proceso. Hemos dejado en el chat 2 links. El primero para que puedas suscribirte a nuestro canal de YouTube. Activar la campanita y de esa forma no te vas a perder ningún material que va a ser de capacitación y de apoyo en este tiempo. Y también te invitamos a formar parte de nuestra comunidad de WhatsApp, donde ahí vas a poder recibir materiales y también puedes solicitar el servicio de mentoría. Estamos para ayudarles y queremos eh, eh, hacer un aporte, así como muchos lo están haciendo en este momento con nosotros. ¿Sí? Llevar adelante un negocio es muy difícil y estar solos lo hace aún más difícil. ¿Sí? Así que les animamos a ser parte, a pedir ayuda y juntos vamos a estar creciendo conforme a la voluntad de Dios.
Y no quería pasar, William, creo que Luisa también está ahí, ¿no? No sé si quería decir
Pues,
algo.
sí, solo que ya estamos en pijama pero sí, está aquí.
No, es que siempre es de ánimo porque es un gran parte de éxito de William.
Ah, sí, de hecho ya me escuchó, ya me dijo que tenía que agregar otra parte a la historia. Me
No,
dice que vale la pena hacer esto, ¿verdad? Que la empresa para nosotros fue una oración contestada, ¿verdad? El inicio, pero para en el momento donde Bruce nos presentó a Tim Sparks y a Scott, perdón, Morrison, la empresa estaba pasando por un periodo muy difícil y quebramos, la verdad es que habíamos quebrado. Y esa ayuda que nos proveyeron Scott y Tim salvó, nos rescató y eso nos hizo ser hoy 30 personas, ¿verdad? En la empresa. Pero es increíble lo que Dios hace, ¿verdad? Y por eso estamos espiritual e infinitamente agradecidos con lo que Dios ha hecho por medio de Bruce, de Scott y de Tim Sparks también, que no está aquí, ¿verdad?
Tal vez, William, solo para que digas un resumen de a qué te dedicas. A ver, pues,
Sí, nosotros somos,
by puro Max.
¿sí? Gracias. Somos una empresa de ingeniería, de automatización industrial, un área como especializada en ingeniería. Y Tim Sparks es un amigo también que se dedica más a la misma área en la que yo, pero en Estados Unidos. Eh, y sin saberlo, estábamos hablando y estuvimos hablando por mucho tiempo sin saber a qué nos dedicábamos. Y como Bruce dice ahí, las relaciones nos salvaron, ¿verdad? Las relaciones que Dios puso en el camino nos salvaron. Porque para cuando por fin hablamos con Tim de a qué se dedicaba él y a qué me dedicaba yo, fue como, oye, ¿y por qué no? Encontramos la forma de colaborar. Y aunque no pasó de inmediato, ¿verdad? No es que, bueno, por ser navegante vamos a hacer negocios juntos, ¿verdad? Y listo. Eh, Fue más bien como conocernos y como empresas, ¿verdad? Hacer una relación formal y ver si podíamos colaborar y entonces se dio. Pero entró la pandemia y ahí fue donde fuimos rescatados por la voluntad de Dios que les digo, que es una historia larga en sí misma, ¿verdad? Pero es más o menos lo que pasó.
¿Otro comentario o pregunta? Si no, pongan en manos de Meme para el cierre.
Yo nada más quiero dar un testimonio de Scott Morrison reciente, como la importancia de vivir primera de Juan 3:18, ¿verdad? Que dice que no nada más amemos de palabras, sino que mostremos la verdad y el amor por nuestras buenas acciones o nuestras acciones. Y yo estaba con Scott, lo coincidimos en febrero y le comenté que tenía una reunión allá en Guatemala, que nos invitaron a Gabriela y a mí. Y Scott me dijo, yo voy también. Y, y bueno, ya no pasó nada, no nos comunicamos, pero el día que llegamos, él ya estaba ahí y estuvo en esta reunión. Y, y él estaba ahí presente, escuchando y participando, pero de una manera como, como de escuchar nada más que estaba Dios diciendo. Entonces, como lo mismo que hizo Bruce allí en Guatemala, como a veces los mentores también necesitamos tener iniciativa con intención. Y eso es lo que veo en Bruce, lo que veo en Scott, lo que veo en muchísimos de los amigos que están aquí conectados que hemos aprovechado, pero bueno, es un testimonio que yo estoy aprendiendo de Scott y de Bruce.
Muy bien, pues Scott, quiero darte muchísimas gracias a nombre de Genera. Es oro molido lo que compartiste. Creo que hay mucho que aprender. Están muy claros los puntos y ejemplos de cada uno de esos puntos. Entonces, es muy fácil de asimilar y de poder replicarlo en nuestras propias vidas. Entonces, muchísimas gracias. Sé que Dios va a usar esto en los que estamos ahorita presentes y en todas las personas que van a ver esta presentación, este webinar en la grabación. Quiero aprovechar para comentarles a los que están presentes ahí en el chat del Zoom. Guille puso la liga para suscribirse al canal de YouTube. Mucho que lo hagan, ahí están todos los webinars anteriores y así como hoy hay muchos otros webinars muy valiosos, se los aconsejo. Y los quiero dejar con otro tema completamente fuera de contexto, pero hemos hablado mucho acerca de mentores. Y creo que la relación entre un mentor y una persona mentoreada se parece mucho al discipulado y es nuestro fuerte como navegantes. Es un caminar juntos, es un aprender uno del otro. Entonces, pues sí, ahorita nos toca ser mentoreados, pero lo que quiero es que a la vuelta de unos años nos demos cuenta que también Dios nos va a usar para que nosotros seamos mentores de otras personas. Entonces es importante que lo que vamos aprendiendo, lo que vamos viviendo, lo que Dios nos va mostrando, realmente lo tengamos muy presente porque, como les digo, después eso va a ser algo que vamos nosotros también a poder compartir y pues con la ayuda de Dios ser tan útiles como Scott ha sido con nuestros amigos de Guatemala. Entonces, pues qué padre que esta vida da muchas vueltas y nos toca recibir, nos toca dar también. Así es que los animo a eso y pues nos vemos el primer martes de noviembre, creo que es el día 7. Aquí los esperamos igual a la misma hora. Y de nuevo, muchas gracias, Scott, y gracias a todos.
Y la charla de Scott va a ser disponible en español y vamos a mandar eso con el link.
Un gran abrazo, muchas gracias, Scott.
Gracias a todos, chicos.
Gracias,
Un placer.
Martes
Gracias.
14. Hasta
Thank you,
luego.
Scott.